Welcome, fellow old farts. Oh, whoops. I thought OFG, I mean, old flyers, sorry. Like most of you, I'm a baby boomer. Born right in the middle of the baby boom, in fact, in 1950 in Hertfordshire, in England. And wasn't the best year to be born in gloomy post-war Britain. It was a dreadful place. I know in Australia you were being asked to eat meat only once a day, but the rationing in England was pretty severe. They hadn't had meat since 1939, I think. But my dad always said to me, we were all right because we had you. He said, oh yeah? He said, yeah, because we had you, we got an extra couple of ounces of butter a week, you know. We got an extra 6 ounces of orange juice and an extra pint of milk and an extra egg. Oh yeah, we did all right, we had you. I don't know if anyone else was born here in 1950, but 1950 always worked out just right. Just right for getting scholarships, getting on courses, to graduating from courses and getting your command. Retiring at age 55 instead of having to go on till you were 60, and even getting the old age pension at 65 instead of having to wait a couple of years longer. So in about 1952 my dad got a job in Dartford in Kent. Terrible place, the Thames estuary with its pea super fogs and unhealthy humid place. I was a sickly child. I barely survived the 50s, but a couple of other people survived quite well. They were there in Dartford, one born 2 or 3 years before me, Mick Jagger, and the other one born 2 months after me, just down the road at Blackheath. You might have heard of him, Richard somebody, owns an airline, Virgin. Those guys are each worth £2.6 billion now. I'm worth somewhat less, I'm afraid. It was some relief for a young boy suffering from croup and in hospital in that dreadful climate when my father got a job in Bahrain in the Persian Gulf. And so it was one wet October afternoon where we went out to Heathrow Airport. The north side, the Heathrow Airport central area was still under construction, but the north side is where they've got the car hire companies at the moment, you know, Enterprise and Eurocar and things. And we trudged out across a sea of mud on scaffolding planks, which were on little piles of bricks like this. And we went to one of these, probably not the same model, but that was the first aeroplane I flew. Bristol Britannia, known as a whispering giant. Never thought anything so big could fly, but it did. It got us to Bahrain via Zurich, first stop, and then Rome. I remember walking out to the airplane in Rome thinking, this can't go on much longer. We haven't crashed yet. And the next stop was Cairo and then Bahrain. In those days, the car used to come out to the aeroplane and park at the back of the aeroplane just behind the starboard wing, and then open up the aft cargo hold and load your suitcases straight into the boot of the car. No customs, no immigration or anything. And I went to school there for a couple of years. I should mention here that the station manager in Bahrain at that time was one Stan Braybrook. You might know the name. His son Michael is known to most of you here. He was the president of the Chamber of Commerce at Jandakot for about 20 years. After 2 years in school in Bahrain, back to England on leave. The airplane flew via Kuwait, Beirut sometimes Damascus, and then Rome, and then Frankfurt for some reason, and then London. They were called direct flights in those days. And shuttled to and from boarding school for the next couple of years on the Britannia, usually stopping in Beirut or Damascus on the way back to England. On one occasion, I remember in Kuwait, they made us all get off the aeroplane and take our passports with us and leave everything on the plane. And they put us in some stinking metal hut for about 6 hours and went away with this great stack of passports like this. I was only 10 or 11 years old, but the adults were looking very worried. There were soldiers with guns escorting us from the aeroplane to this shed. We couldn't sit down because there was a row of Arab-type latrines which had overflowed onto the floor, and there was no screening anyway. And the adults all looked really worried, and I found out later that was one of the earlier Iraqi invasions of Kuwait. They tried to grab it then. That was, 30 years before Saddam had a go at it. Anyway, after 4 years in Bahrain, Dad got posted to Malaya, as it was then, and then we upgraded to the Comet 4C. Obviously much faster, flew a lot higher, and a wonderful way to travel. Again, via Bahrain. In those days, you couldn't land in Kuala Lumpur. The jets couldn't land there, so you used to fly to Singapore and stay the night in Raffles Hotel, and then the next morning you'd go out to Paya Lebar Airport and climb into one of these, DC-3 Dakota, which took you Singapore to KL via Malacca. The last sector of that was a bumpy old ride. So as a schoolboy, I'd be going in the rear door of one of those, walking up to the front, climbing over the main spar, still wearing a wool worsted suit and a straw boater. No one told me I could take my tie off in those days, but did that a few times for 3 years, shuttling backward and forward to Singapore. And for some reason, the Comet always went US on the way to Singapore. Never did one trip without having to do an engine change, either in Karachi, I think once in Bombay, once in Calcutta, once in Delhi. It took 8 hours to do an engine change in a Comet, so we always arrived late. For some reason, it never went unserviceable on the return to England. Although we did lose an engine once over India, but they pressed on. They didn't change it. So after 3 years in the 60s, 62 to 65, shuttling to and from what was then Malaysia, Dad's next job was, he was a civil engineer. We were posted to Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, which was to be home for the next 20 years. There's a East African Airways Comet, terrible. That's me arriving at Dar es Salaam, East African Airways. Rather a blurred picture, I'm afraid. Went to East Africa on that a few times. By this time at school in England, I was in the Air Cadets, and at the age of 15, I think 16, started to learn to fly that. The Sedberg glider, we did our dual instruction in that. After about 10 launches and that, they sent us off solo in the Kirby Cadet Mark III. So I got my gliding wings when I was 16. That was the weekends. One Sunday, there was a bit of commotion going on in one of the hangars at RAF Westmoreland, which by then was non-operational RAF station. And so we went over there to have a look what was going on, and the Beatles were in there filming a film. I think they called it Magical Mystery Tour. So we got to meet the Beatles. Well, I chatted to 3 of them, and of course I got back to boarding school that night and told my mates, I've just met the Beatles, and I've seen them in 1966, height of their fame, was nobody believed me. They thought, bullshit, you haven't met them. Until the next morning when the Daily Express arrived and they opened up the newspaper. Well, it didn't have to open it. On the front page of the Daily Express was the headlines, sort of imitating wartime headlines. At a secret airfield somewhere in Kent. And there was a picture of the Beatles and climbing some staircase in the hangar. And us guys that roped in as extras were in the front of the picture. So then they did believe me. At school, Combined Cadet Force used to take us on trips in the Chipmunk. Flew that a few times, and later came back to that later, taking Air Cadets for trips in it myself. But that was what I did up to about the age of 17. Then got a scholarship to the Royal Air Force, which was, I was 16 when I got the scholarship. They paid for your school fees between the age of 16 and when you left school at 18, and they reserved a place for you at Cranwell, the RAF Training College, but they threw in an RAF flying scholarship at Biggin Hill Surrey and Kent Flying Club. And the first 15 hours were done on this beast, the Fournier Air Coupe, strange aeroplane, nice to fly, but you always came back reeking of petrol because the wings had a pump to pump the fuel into the on top of the engine where that black patch is in front of the cockpit. It always seemed to drip onto your legs, so a reek of aviation petrol. We did 15 hours on that, and then just one 45-minute trip on the Cessna 150 to teach us spinning and spin recovery, and then the next 15 hours were on the Piper Cherokee 140. In those days, the Air Force scholarship paid for 30 hours, but you needed 35 hours to get a PPL, private pilot's license. So for the last 5 hours, because the Piper Cherokee 140 cost £5 10 shillings an hour to fly, the Cessna 150 was only £4 10 shillings an hour. So saved money. I did the final 5 hours just flying around solo in the Cessna 150. Wrote to my father in Africa, who sent me a cheque for £25 to pay for the final 5 hours and the PPL application. Oh, there's me, uniformed to go to Canada. They chucked in a international Air Cadet exchange. There were about 10 different countries exchanged Air Cadets, and some of us went to the States. I went to Canada for 6 weeks. There's the flying scholarship wings, and underneath there the gliding wings. We travelled out to a Canadian Air Force base in Germany called Lahr, down near Baden-Baden in the Black Forest, from RAF Benson in one of those machines. I was sitting in the back, knew it was unpressurized because between the door and the door frame there was about a half-inch gap, and you could see, as you crossed the English Channel, you could see the sea through the gap in the door. Those airplanes had done good service in Malaya during the Malayan emergency with the Australians in confrontation in Indonesia, in Borneo, in Sabah and Sarawak, and also in the Middle East in Aden. In fact, when they did a major service on one of these, they took it apart and they found about 5 tons of sand inside it, so that's why it's rather slow. I wouldn't call it slow, but I think it was the only 4-engine aeroplane ever to get a bird strike on the trailing edge. From Lahr, we had a couple of days there, wonderful food in this Canadian Air Force station, and then they flew us out to Canada in the Yukon, which is much like a Britannia turboprop airplane, to Trenton Air Force Base in Ontario, and then zigzagged all over Canada in other airplanes, I forget what, DC-3s and things, and ended up in Vancouver Island, where we were based in Comox, and there they had this aeroplane. It was great fun, anti-submarine warfare, the Argus. Canada at the time were training people to be astronauts, so the inside of the airplane had no seats at all, just foam padding around the ceiling and down the sides, and that was fun because they took the airplane up to about 25,000 feet and did a zoom climb and then bunted at 0G for about 20-25 seconds, so you were flying around in zero gravity and doing somersaults and things like that, which was fun. Then we dropped down to low level and flew all the way around Vancouver Island at about 500 feet. You see it's got a glass nose. You could lie down on a sort of trolley on railway lines and pull yourself forward into the glass nose, and had a good, pretty close-up view of Vancouver Island from there. So back in the UK, just finished school, about to join the Royal Air Force, and got a rather rude letter from them saying you're overdue for your medical. I didn't know what they meant. I didn't know. I wasn't in the RAF. I didn't know I needed an RAF medical, but they insisted I did. I had a current PPL medical. I mean, in those days, under the age of 40, your PPL medical was valid for 2 years, I think. So they called me back to Biggin Hill, gave me a medical, which I failed. They said I got a low tone hearing loss in the left ear. Well, they're probably right, but they said, that's it. You've got to go to the Central Medical Establishment in London. for further evaluation. So I went there, and the specialist gave me lots more tests and hearing tests and things, and eventually said, "That's it. I'm afraid you're not fit to be aircrew, a pilot. No, you're not going to be a pilot in the Royal Air Force. That's for sure." And I went, "Oh dear," very despondent. I thought, "Okay, then I'll be a navigator." And he said, "Nope, not navigator, not any aircrew, I'm afraid." He said, "Not even air traffic control. It's secretarial or equipment branch for you, my lad." So my flying career was over before it began. I was very despondent, and came out of CME in Tottenham Court Road, strolled down to Marble Arch, through Hyde Park into Kensington Gardens. I sat down on a bench by the round pond where I remembered as a kid my mother had taken me to sail my model boat, and for some reason I've missed out a bit of it. The specialist, when he finished my final medical, he said, "What do I do with this manila envelope? I suppose where's this got to go? I suppose it goes back to Biggin Hill." And I said, "Well, yeah, I'll take it with you if you like." He said, "Oh, will you?" I said, "Yeah." I wasn't going back to Biggin Hill, but I took it. So I had a few hours to wait in London, sitting by the round pond, remembering my early days there. And I thought, I'll open up this envelope and see what's inside it. Saw my medical records, pissed off, ripped them up, dumped them in the bin, and went out to the airport and jumped on a VC-10 to go back home to Africa. It wasn't actually an East African Airways aeroplane, it was BUA, British United Airways. So it was a charter flight from London to Entebbe. I can't remember how I got from Entebbe back to Dar es Salaam, probably on the same aeroplane. But anyway, BUA at the time were the largest independent airline in the world outside of North America. Later merged with Caledonian Airways to become British Caledonian. For some reason, when I was Googling pictures, I wanted a picture of Britannia, I wanted a picture of a VC-10, wanted a picture of a Comet. AI contacted me and sent me this rather bizarre picture. If you see it, it's got a Britannia cockpit, a VC-10 tail, and 4 Comet engines, but on the wing where the Britannia engine would be. So that's what you get if you use the internet nowadays. They know what you're looking at, they know what you're searching for, and they make up what they think you want, and then send that to you. Rather strangely, it's got another tail lower down. That's it. My career was over before it even begun. As you might have guessed, my flying career did go on a little bit longer than that. So back home in East Africa, as I said, I had a PPL and valid medical. I joined Tanzanian Air Services, more or less as an apprentice pilot with them, did a few trips with them, dual trips, but flew to lots of bush trips on my own in a Cessna 150 and trips in Kenya as well. Dar es Salaam Flying Club, Piper Cherokee 140. That's me with my younger brother and younger sister coming back from a trip. I've got a friend, he retired as an air marshal from the Royal Air Force. And in the Air Force, he liked to tell people that he taught me to wear shoes when I came to England to join the RAF. Not actually true, but if he sees this picture, he'll claim it was true. Yeah, after a year or so of that, my dad got a letter from the Royal Air Force. And they said, where is he? They've been paying my school fees for 2 years, so they've given me this flying scholarship and the trip to Canada. They were expecting me to join the RAF. For some strange reason, the RAF had lost my medical records. So they invited me back to England, and I was tempted to try to come to Australia at that time. England was the last place I wanted to end up, but one reason or another I did, and they said, "You come back, you need a medical, and then you can start flying training." A colleague, my father's in Africa, had the DFC. He'd survived two tours on Wellingtons as a pathfinder. He'd done two tours, 25 missions each, had the DFC. He was a government pilot there in the ex-RAF, so he advised me to try the RAF. That's why I came back to UK. Had to go at the medical, Audiometry test, no problem. Just keep pressing the button. And it got me through my medicals for the next 37 years. When you can't hear the tone anymore in the right ear, just give it one more, and then another. And then, there's another tone in the other ear, a different frequency. And they give that, it gets quieter and quieter and quieter. And when you can't hear it, just give it another one. And if they don't start another one, give it one more, and then fine. I've always had good hearing, according to the medics. So, after officer training, you did ab initio training on the Chipmunk, but because I got a PPL, they skipped that. You didn't do that. And whenever there was a break between courses, I'd jump on a Charlie 130 Hercules and get a free lift back to East Africa. But then came back to UK, fly, start my basic training, and that's a Jet Provost Mark III. Unpressurized, pretty good trainer, constant thrust, variable noise machine, side-by-side seating, quite adequate for its day. That was 1971. Basic flying training, bit of instrument flying, navigation, medium level, high level, and introduction to low flying, and low level navigation, just at 300 knots, which is 5 nautical miles per minute. After about 75 hours on that, went up to this lovely beast, the Jet Provost Mark V. That's pressurized, a lot more power, wonderful airplane, good trainer, side-by-side seating. You see the Martin Baker ejection seats there. More navigation at low level, 360 knots, 6 nautical miles per minute, and lots of aerobatics, and of course night flying and more instrument flying and things. And then during that phase, we bought a Tiger Moth. I saw it advertised in Flight magazine for £1,050, and just been imported from France, which is why it's got a new registration for 1950. But it had been built by Morris Motors in Cowley in 1943, and then exported to France after the war, and just come back. Had a hook for target towing, and the idea was everybody on the course would chip in £100 each. There were 17 of us, and we'd have enough money to buy it. But about 5 of our course were Jordanians, and they weren't interested. They hadn't got any money anyway, and so it was just myself, a Canadian. We had quite a lot of Canadians in our training with us because Canada had just, at a stroke, cut their flying training program totally. That's in the basic, ab initio, basic, middle, advanced. Everyone was in the training pipeline, was chopped, kicked out. So most of them came to the UK and joined the RAF. So all through my career we had Canadians. Anyway, 3 of us bought that. So we had that to fly during that summer in Yorkshire, Linton on Ouse, sort of James Herriot country. Beautiful, beautiful part of the world. And that's the Tiger. After basic flying training, we, my Canadian mate Keith Griffin and I, jumped in the Tiger Moth and flew to Anglesey, the Isle of Anglesey. That's that lump in the northwest of Wales, a little island there, RAF Valley, which is the advanced flying training base. Interesting trip across the Pennines, just northeast of Manchester there, with about 45 knot headwinds and the Tiger Moth and low cloud. We were just going over the Pennines. We had to climb to go over those stone walls that had been put there back in the Bronze Age by some careless person who wasn't expecting someone to come along in a Tiger Moth and having to fly over them. And along the North Wales coast, Llandudno, is it that Llandudno? Cliffs there, underneath the cloud, getting around the cliffs, snowing heavily. And my flying jacket ended up with about an inch of ice on it. My hand got frozen to the throttle. When we landed at Valley, we landed across the runway because the wind was from the north, and we landed on the grass, stopped in about 10 feet, and Keith had to jump out of the forward cockpit and run to the fire station to get the fireman to come and stand in front of the leading edge of the lower wing so it would stop flying, and we could taxi it with them walking in front of it, taxi it to the lee of the hangar. But let's see what the next flight is. Oh, that's the airplane we were supposed to fly in advanced flying training, the Fallen Gnat, used by the Red Arrows at the time. So we did our usual 3 months ground school in all the subjects, like, you know, weapons, meteorology, everything, and did the simulator, started flying the Gnat. Well, I didn't get a trip. My mate, cousin of mine, was on exercise 9. I'd only done the simulator, I hadn't even done exercise 1. He was on exercise 9, which was the pre-solo check with his American exchange instructor, Mel Tractor. And at the end of every general handling sortie, the instructor would tell you to show us your arrows and do 5-minute arrows. So Nigel went to full power to pull up into a loop, and the auxiliary gearbox blew up and departed through the bottom of the aeroplane, and they departed through the top of the aeroplane and came down courtesy of Martin Baker. It wasn't Martin Baker, but they landed somewhere in North Wales. And that was the end of my career on the Gnat before it even began, because the Red Arrows were about to depart on their first tour overseas to North America, and the Orpheus engine had its life reduced from 1400 hours to 700 hours, which meant instead of having, I think, 75 aeroplanes, we had about 5. And the Red Arrows at Kemble, 7, needed about 9 aeroplanes. I think they only had 3 or 4. So they took our aeroplanes and went to the States. That was the end of the Gnat. So we converted to the Hunter, and I'm glad we did. Wonderful aeroplane. That's the training version of the Hunter, the single seat version anyway. And the Hunters, because there was no Gnat flying, the Hunters were at RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire. So the Air Force took the opportunity to dig up the runways and resurface them. So at Valley that summer, I was the only one who could fly from the grass in my Tiger Moth. And there I am flying around South Stack Lighthouse in Holy Island in the Irish Sea, just near the Air Force Base. And you can see the airspeed indicator there on the wing strut. As you went faster, the piece of tin on a spring used to go further back, and as you slowed down, the piece of tin would go forward, and when it hit the red sector, you stalled. That's just before the days of glass cockpits, but probably just as reliable. That time I also got my hands on acquired a Oster Mark III for a very low price, a couple of £100 I think it was. It was ex-army, Oster Mark III, which was good because you could get 4 people in it and take them flying around the Welsh mountains. Great fun. And then the course ahead of us graduated, so we went to Fairford and did the training, advanced flying training in the Hunter T7, and that's me about to go first solo in the Mark VI. Wonderful as a 22-year-old to be given a single engine swept wing fighter to play in. Tremendous fun. The briefing was take off on runway 27 from Fairford, climb straight ahead to 10,000 feet, you'll then be in Welsh airspace, and then try and do a turn. Don't do anything before you get to 10,000 feet. And by the time you've got a hang on flying it, you come back to Fairford. I joined downwind, and they said you're clear to finals. Concorde was on finals. It hadn't entered service. This would be 1972, so the Concorde was just doing its very early development flying from Fairford, and we got to look over that quite a few times. And then after flying training, they flew it back to Valley, RAF Valley, finished flying training, was posted to Chivenor in Devon on the Hunter for the weapons phase of the course, weapons training. Started off with city weave, ranging and tracking, where you range the diamonds around the wingtip of the aeroplane and track the back of the cockpit with your pipper, and he does evasive maneuvers up and down, and you closing in from 500 yards to about 250 yards, ranging in with a throttle twist grip as you get closer and increasing the pull. And that's training you to fire air to air, and we also did air to ground with the Hunter 30 mil Aiden cannon. normally fired 2 cannons, but one time I fired all 4 at the same time. That was amazing. The whole airplane shook and the cockpit filled with cordite and all the circuit breakers would pop out and you have to reset them, but tremendous fun. One of my colleagues on Hunters, he might be watching this, Al Pollock, he had a bit of a disagreement with the government, broke away from a training flight, a formation from West Raynham. I think it was because the RAF weren't invited to do a fly past of Buckingham Palace for their 50th anniversary. So he decided to beat the shit out of the House of the Parliament and the Ministry of Defence, which he did quite effectively a few times, and then turn around and he told me this himself, he saw the River Thames glistening in front of him, a row of about 9 bridges. I thought, I'll have a go at them. And he flew down the Thames and up over London Bridge, just like looming up in front of him was Tower Bridge. So this is not a real picture, this is a painting that hangs in the Royal Air Force Club in Piccadilly. But as he was about to fly through this red London double-decker bus, crossed the bridge, and so that's why he's that high. But he tells me that that is a realistic depiction of what it was like. He was amazed he didn't lose his fin. He did lose his job. He got kicked out of the Air Force on medical grounds, but he's still with us. He's still with us, good mate. Here we go on to talking about other training we did in the Air Force. The top entry is hypoxia training, where they put you in a pressure chamber, reduce the pressure to take you up to an altitude equivalent to 25,000 feet. And so you can experience hypoxia, because you've got your bone dome on and oxygen mask, and at 25,000 feet you have a doctor each, and they take off your oxygen mask. It's on a toggle, you know. There's my daughter modelling RAF bone dome. So you had the mask on and that chain there, and that toggle clamped it onto your mouth. She's now nearly 50. She lives in Queensland on the Sunshine Coast. But at 25,000 feet they take off your oxygen and you see how long you stay conscious for, and they'd get you to write your name and address on a piece of paper. They had a clipboard, a piece of paper, and then write 100 and deduct 7. It was easy. 93. Then write your name and address again. Then 93. Keep subtracting 7 from the previous number, no problem. 93 minus 7, 86. Then write your name and address again, and then 86 minus 7. Oh, I can't work out that one. Oh, start write your name and address again, and then the pen sort of trailed across the paper as you go unconscious. So then the doctor puts your mask back on, you start breathing again, and you wake up. One guy was still going. He got down to about 40 something, 30 something. He hadn't passed out. He was a smoker, and the smokers go forever, as I found out once climbing a pyramid in Mexico with a couple of my cabin crew. They can go, it was 10,000 feet, and they walk up, they weren't even out of breath. But the other entries there are where we do explosive decompression training. The first one for the Nat was same as the Hunter, where they explode you from 35,000 feet up to 50,000 feet in 3 seconds. They do that by gradually taking you up to 35,000 feet in the chamber and then mixing it with another chamber, which is probably 100,000 feet, and they just flip a lever and woof, everything goes cold, adiabatic cooling and instant fog. Couldn't see the other side of the chamber really, and of course everything, that's just it, so you know what it would be like in a military airplane. Military airplanes are usually pressurized to half the height plus 2,000 feet. So at 50,000 feet, you'd normally have an altitude of 27,000 feet. And that gives you experience of what it would be like if you got damage to your cockpit or for any other reason, the cockpit lost pressurization. And then the middle stamp below there, the one in blue black, was for the Lightning, where we went from, I can't read it, 25,000 feet to 56,000 feet in 3 seconds. And that's even more alarming, because you might get the bends when you accelerate, ascend so quickly. That's the nitrogen in the blood boiling off and causing pain in the joints. So what they did was they flushed all the nitrogen out of your body for an hour or two before this experiment, and they did that by wearing your bone dome and going into a lecture theatre, plugging your oxygen hose into the ring main and your mic-tail lead, and watch a movie for an hour or two, and that way you could get all the nitrogen out of your blood, and then plug into a portable oxygen bottle, go into the chamber, plug into their oxygen system, and that way you won't get the bends when they flip the lever and you zoom up to 56,000 feet. And they used to give you a countdown. They say 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. You breathe in, and then at 5 you let the air out. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So that when they flip the lever, your lungs would be empty. Otherwise you'd burst, you know. And you also wore a pressure jerkin when you flew above 50,000 feet. You wore a jacket, pressure jerkin and G-suit, and the oxygen system would deliver pressure, 100% oxygen at 60 millimeters of mercury pressure, but it would give the same pressure to the jacket on the outside and the G-suit. Otherwise you'd burst open like a rack of spare ribs. And of course, when they fire the lever, there's still some air in your lungs. So you breathe out, but all of a sudden your lungs are full again. And 60 millimeters of mercury pressure in the mask at the same time. The air is squeaking out through the mask. I actually think that air came out of my tear ducts and my ears and every other orifice as the air inside your body expands. So that was a bit of fun. Where we go next? That's the oxygen mask, and that's all the simulator training we did on the Hunter, and then the Lightning. Posted to RAF Colchester in Norfolk to fly the English Electric Lightning, and that's the Mark I Lightning 2-seater, side-by-side seater. They gave you 4 trips in that before sending you solo. Lightning could cruise at 65,000 feet at Mach 2, and I think the only picture ever taken of Concorde was taken by a Lightning. The only picture of Concorde doing Mach 2. It would actually go faster, and it would go supersonic in the climb. It would go supersonic even without reheat. But you did a reheat takeoff, and there's the Mark I Lightning again, F1A, and that's me about to do my first solo in the single-seater F1A. A colleague of mine got back from his first solo. Somebody asked him, how did it go? And he said, it's all right. He said, I was with it all the way until I let the brakes off. There we got the missile, the Firestreak missile. There are 1A, 2 Firestreak missiles, which only had a stern capability, but the missile would accelerate to 1.8 Mach over the launch speed of the aircraft in something like 3 seconds. So it's pretty good missile. It had a range of about 5 kilometers. Heat-seeking, very basic, difficult to jam, good missile. That's us doing a formation practice for a visit by His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh. And I'm in the lead aircraft with Dickie Duckett, who went on to become the leader of the Red Arrows. And there we are, the Cromer golf course where Dickie Duckett and I used to play golf. There we are. You see the bunkers. I lost my ball there. And there's another one of the F1A Lightning. Amazing aircraft to fly, very powerful, over the North Sea. And that's the Lightning cockpit. The thing looks like a Wellington boot in the right corner there, folded up, is the boot, for like a gun boot for the radar. So you unfolded that and put your eyes in there and fly the radar. In the middle at the top is the gun sight. That's the radar boot, attitude indicator, Mach meter airspeed indicator, radios, throttles, radar hand controller was out here, the throttles, Martin Baker ejection seat, seat pan handle, fuel gauges, autopilot, all the warning things there, and the missile arm light there, show you if you've got any ammonia left for cooling the missiles, and G meter up there as well. At Coulter Shore, one of the students taxiing in had a hydraulic failure and went out of control, and the airplane went conveniently straight into the boss's office. Made a hole in the wall. The pilot was a bit injured on his left side, but he was okay. He finished the course, he graduated. But the throttles were damaged, so that he couldn't shut the engines down. Here's a view of it from the other the missile on the ground there. So the engine continued to run and spitting bits of brick out of the back end. And eventually, it took 25 minutes for them to shut it down till they got the Rolls-Royce development engineer out, and he could open a panel in the side of the aeroplane and disconnect the linkage and shut the engine down. But by then, the vacuum from the one engine that was still running had opened the drawers of the file cabinet in the boss's office and extracted all the files. That's probably why he passed the course. So, a very good vacuum cleaner, and I think that's what inspired James Dyson to make his very good vacuum cleaner, because he bought one and there he is hoisting it up to the roof of his factory in Malmesbury in Wiltshire. That's where it is now, as a staff canteen for Inspire, his workers. And after the course I was posted out to Germany. West Germany is the dark green bit. What the former East Germany, Deutsche Democratic Republic, is the eastern bit. It's actually a modern map of the life satisfaction in Germany today. I didn't find a map of East Germany, but it happens to coincide with what was formerly communist East Germany and what was capitalist West Germany. And we were based North Germany, 68 nautical miles from the border. There was a buffer zone and a 30-mile wide air defence identification zone, and it was our job to police that buffer zone and the ADIS to stop people crossing it from either from west to east or from the enemy, from the Warsaw Pact countries, crossing it from east to west. So we did a couple of trips on the T-Bird, the Mark IV Lightning, and then flew the Mark IIA. It's got a bigger, thin, square top, same missiles, a lot more thrust, and sort of a crescent-shaped leading edge gives it better lift. In fact, the wing is swept back 62 degrees, so there's not much conventional lift when you take off 180 knots. In fact, if you built a runway from here all the way across the Nullarbor and accelerated a Lightning down it, it wouldn't get airborne. It's only because you pull it off the ground and you get this huge vortex over the wing which lifts it up in the air. I'd only been on the Squadron 3 or 4 weeks when they said there's a trip back to the UK to RAF Bentley Priory for the Squadron reunion. Do you want to go on that? Well, as my girlfriend was a stewardess in British Airways, this was based at Heathrow, this was a great way to get back to UK to see her. So I went on Argosy with the boss and a couple of other guys to the Squadron reunion, even though I'd only been on it for 3 weeks myself. But the reunion included a lot of pilots who'd been on the Squadron since the Battle of Britain. And I got very interested in the Squadron history and wrote a book called A Cobra in the Sky, which has long been out of print, but you can read it on the internet if you go to that URL, www.92squadron.com, because it's on there and you can read it for free on that website, and it's still being updated to this day. Actually, this is before my time, but these are some of the old guys that I met at the Squadron reunion. There's Stanford Tuck on the right, who was the leader of the squadron for a lot of the time, and he wrote the foreword to my book, which I took 2 or 3 years to write. And the other pilots who were on the squadron, Alan Wright, and in the middle, Brian Kingham. The squadron boss on 92 Squadron in the Battle of Britain, the boss always getting shot down, so the flight commanders kept again and again being the ones who ran the squadron. And the chappie on the left is General Adolf Galland, who was Hitler's wartime inspector of fighters and became a good friend of mine and Stanford Tuck. And Stanford Tuck's friend, Simon, who was a subaltern in the army. And it's very interesting to meet him because he was a squadron commander on ME-109s during the Battle of Britain, and was the first squadron commander of a jet fighter squadron, the Messerschmitt 262. So it's interesting to get first original information from him about the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, and of course I'm very interested in the jet engine and the development. He'd met Hitler and his boss, of course, Hermann Goering. I slept in the same bed, as not at the same time, but Ernst Udet, the guy who chose what type of jet engine they would use. And at the time, it was thought that the Germans were way ahead of us with the axial flow compressor. So I got to know him very, very well. He kept coming to reunions right up to about 1980. That was the squadron during the Battle of Britain. It was top scoring fighter squadron in the Battle of Britain and the top scoring fighter squadron in the RAF during World War II. I met several of those guys. Johnny Kent is the squadron commander. Met him a few times. And there's another one. Oh, and the guy on the left there holding the mug, he was the squadron adjutant. More about him later. Mac McGowan. He'd been in the First World War. Me, lightning, I'll whip through these a bit quickly. We did the winter survival course, a bad cold group in Germany, bloody cold. That was what we got to eat for 4 days. Damn difficult to light a fire. But after 4 days escape and survival course, we did a night escape and evasion, being hunted by the German army on skis. And we hadn't eaten for 4 days, except I ate the rabbit's liver. We couldn't light a fire, so we couldn't cook it, but the liver tasted quite good. And by that time you're pretty weak, and the Germans caught us and took us to a camp called Fussen on the Austrian border, kept us there freezing all night long, took your shoes off and no jacket, just a thin cotton flying suit, -10. We were guarded by the Royal Irish Rangers. I don't think they liked officers, and it was miserable. And then they interrogated you. They gave you experience of 3 different types of interrogation throughout the night. Don't mess around with that, it's not fun. But after that, we got a week's skiing instruction from the German ski instructors and taught to ski in Bavaria. That was quite fun. There we are back at Gütersloh. We always took off as a pair of lightnings. And that's the barrier at the end of the runway. If you had a brake failure, or if you had to abort the takeoff, or if you had a brake failure on landing, the barrier would catch you. Made a hell of a racket. There's over 30,000 pounds of static thrust in full reheat, and heck of a racket. There used to be noise complaints, but you've heard of Miele, the washing machine and dishwasher. Miele, German company, well, they were based in Gütersloh, and at one time Herr Miele had been the mayor of Gütersloh, and when he got noise complaints from the Herrenfolk, he said, well, I'd rather hear the roar of British fighters than the rumble of Russian tanks, and that shut them up. When you took the barrier, made a bit of a mess. That's about a week or two after I got there, but not me, another guy. Took the barrier. We also had a hook, a big leaf spring hook. We pull a lever and the hook would drop, which we could pick up a cable, but sometimes the cable wouldn't catch the hook and then you'd go into the barrier. We had 2 aeroplanes on 5 minutes readiness to scramble, go and intercept the target coming east to west. We slept in our boots and flying kit. In the daytime you could be airborne in about 3 minutes and 25 seconds, but we had to be airborne in 5, and then you go supersonic out to the border and intercept whatever target was coming in. A lot of the time you weren't actually scrambled to intercept an unknown aircraft coming east to west, but a light aircraft like these out here, which had strayed into the buffer zone because of a strong westerly wind, and you go and get him and turn him and try and bring him back into West Germany. There was one doctor who used to get airborne in an Piper Aztec and fly around from his own airstrip. He hadn't got a license, the aircraft wasn't registered, and he was in the middle of the buffer zone, but he'd get airborne, fly around quickly and land before anyone could catch him. My mate Steve Giles was scrambled to get him because they wanted a picture of him, actually caught in the act, you know. And that's the ground crew, that's the bedroom on the right there that we used to sleep in. Run to the airplane, grab the Mae West off the pitot tube, sling that on and get in the airplane. Check in with ops, who would tell you whether it was a real scramble or a practice, because we got a practice scramble every day if you didn't get a real scramble. That's showing you the reheat, and it's an airplane that went out to South Africa as a civilian airplane, but no longer flying, I believe. Another mate of mine, Rod Sargent, and the boss, and the RAF photographer Mel Gibson took that picture. And then me, they're showing the Firestreak missile with the glass nose heat-seeking device, and that's actually me flying that, coming into land. We all had our own aeroplane, and mine was Delta. You had your name on the side. And a mate of mine who was a refugee from East Germany, he was a paramedic, and he was known as the duty spy because he was an East German, and he always used to stand there and take pictures of our airplanes coming into land. And I was able to contact him when I'd been allocated my aeroplane to go off on a 1-hour flight, and told him, right, I'm off, I'll be landing in an hour's time. So he got out there to take a picture of me landing. It came in over the Ems Canal, and in World War II that base had been a night fighter base with a Messerschmitt 110, which would be sent up to intercept the Lancaster bombers going over to bomb Berlin. And so they'd flood down that canal in the daytime to flood the airfield, so it looked like a lake, so that the RAF wouldn't bomb it. And it seems to have worked, because all the buildings were original and undamaged when we got there. There's the East German border. That was our job, patrolling that at low level, just 200 yards from the border, with the missiles on the other side tracking us. And that's Roger McGowan, the son of the chappie I showed you in the Battle of Britain, the squadron adjutant. That's his son. We're in a pub having lunch in West Germany, and that's the fence, the border of East Germany, and the ploughed field beyond it with the mines and anti-personnel mines hanging on the thing, and the watchtower, and that was all the way along the border between the East and West. And the proprietor of the pub, his mother lived in that house over there in the East German side, and they used to call to one another and wave. And then the East German police stopped her from doing that. They said, you're not allowed to communicate. So when they had a new baby, they'd go out and hold the baby up, and grandma would come to the window and wave. And then eventually they stopped her doing that. So when they had another child, they said grandma would just open the window, but she'd be at the back of the room going like that. We had Victor tankers refueling us. They could refuel 2 of us at a time. So although people used to say the Lightning was pretty short range, I tell you, it was pretty long range when you're already at high level and you fill up with fuel, because you haven't got to climb. You haven't got to use reheat to get up there and climb, and you're now full of fuel again. So instead of having another hour's endurance, you've got about another hour, 45 minutes endurance. And after that, you're really looking forward to landing and getting back to the crew room. And then they say, but the tanker captain wants to get rid of his fuel. Can you go back to the tanker and refuel again? Oh, which we did. That's the cockpit, a young flying officer when I used to have hair. And that's a painting on my wall in my house in Canada, in the basement, done by a friend of mine called Mike Rondo. The 2 Firestreak missiles, and we also had 2 30mm Aiden cannon mounted at the top of the nose, just after the intake. That's the barrel there. Or we could take the 2 missiles off and put another gun pack in and have 4 30mm Aiden cannon. Coming into land with the Victor tanker. We tanked daylight tanking once a week on a Friday, and the tanker crew would stay with us for the weekend, and then they'd take off Monday night and we'd practice night air-to-air refueling. And that's my aeroplane again, Delta. That's what it was like when it went supersonic. The wings were swept back 62 degrees, so even at Mach 2 the aircraft didn't suffer control reversal. It still operated just as it would subsonic. And at Mach 2 at 45,000 feet, you could pull the stick back and go 85 degrees nose up, and got up once about 80,000 feet. I rolled it inverted to try and pull over the top and pull down again, and the air's so thin up there, the rate of roll was very, very slow, and I was upside down pulling back on the stick to get down, but it was still going up ballistically, and the old altimeter was going. Because if you lost cabin pressurization at that height, you're really unstuck, you know. Most of our roll was low level though. That's over the Ada Dam, which I swam across once, and all our wartime roll was daylight, low level guns environment. And at low level, you'd normally fly around at 360 knots, which was the economical cruising speed. But if you put full cold power on, you'd accelerate at about 15 knots per second without reheat. So you could slip through supersonic very, very quickly if you weren't keeping an eye on the Mach meter. And once I was coming back from that dam to Goodisloe at low level, and a 4-ship of Jaguars did an in-place turn right in front of me and rolled up in front of me. And oh, I've got to have a go at them. Started the camera. Missiles still had some ammonia left, so I could get missile acquisition and film them. Closed in and put the throttles into the far left corner. Closed in, filmed the missile acquisition on the number 4. Switched over to the number 2. Recorded the missile acquisition on them. Switched the master armament, selected the guns. Closed in for guns, and I felt a bit of a bumping. I thought I'd gone through the wake of the airplane in front, you know, one of the Jaguars. But I later found out it was actually the trim change as you go supersonic, and I was up about 200 feet because they were at 500 feet, and the missile sight line looked up 1.5 degrees. So you needed to get low to get a good missile acquisition. And I'd just gone supersonic without knowing it. I was doing 1.1, and then right in front of me, only a mile away, was Varendorf. We went over that at 1.1 Mach. I tell you, not one word of complaint from the local people. Our targets were the German Air Force, and anything RAF, Phantoms, Jaguars, Harriers, anything with a east to west vector was fair game. We'd intercept it at low level and have a go at it. A lot of them were the German F-104, F-104G, I think. I had a ride in one once. We got on really well with that squadron at Hopston. They were great guys. And the G91, they turned really tight, very hard to get a gun's kill on them and film it at low level. They were very maneuverable. So that was the Lightning. Once a year we tank out to Decimomano in Sardinia, and there we are, 2 Victor tankers, 2 Lightnings in the distance refueling from one tanker, and myself and my wingman refueling from that. Over the French Alps, one tanker would refuel from the other, and the one in front, giving away all his fuel, would turn around and fly back to England, and the other tanker would take us the rest of the way to Decimomano. It's off the coast of Italy. It belongs to Italy. It's an Italian Air Force base. It was funded 70% by the Italians, 20% by the Germans, and 10% by us. So you got the landing slots and takeoff and the running of the station was all done in proportion: 70%, 20%, 10%. And we'd do air-to-air gun firing against a flag over the Mediterranean, and our attack squadrons would do air-to-ground on the range there, which is what the Germans and the Italians were doing. We could use the Italian or the German officers' mess. And Italian food was pretty good, and the German officers' mess was great fun. But we didn't have an officers' mess. We had an all-ranks canteen, and nobody ate there. We'd go downtown, get downtown Cagliari, and or for a princely sum of about $2, you get a good dinner. Wine was free, but pretty rough. There's the squadron. I'm the one in flying kit, sitting next to Wing Commander Bruce, the boss. Great guy. Died all too soon, as did lots of those people. And there's Roger McGowan, my best man, on the back row on the right, the one who's a picture of him by East Germany. He's no longer with us. He died in Kuala Lumpur. He retired to KL, but not before at the age of 70, he did the swim from Fremantle to Rottnest Island at the age of 70. The guy next to me, wearing virtually nothing, on my right, so second from the left in the picture, Nigel Wood, was chosen to be Britain's first spaceman, first astronaut. And he had a 1-year selection procedure with a competition between him, an army officer, a Royal Marine, and a naval officer. And after 1 year, one of them had to drop out, but he was the one who was selected to be Britain's first astronaut. By that time, he'd left the squadron, done a test pilot course, but he went to the States for 2 years training, and was going to go up in March 1976. But the Challenger disaster happened in October 75, so that scuppered his plans to be an astronaut. He never went up in space. That's the Canberra, the mighty Canberra bomber that trailed the flag that we fired against. And I gave my camera to the navigator of the Canberra. And after half an hour of firing at the flag, we used to come up, formate on the flag, have a look, see if there are any holes in it. And that's me in Foxtrot. He took a picture of me slowing down to his speed, and that's the same speed as the Canberra, flying 180 knots. That's the slowest a Lightning would fly. Any 1 knot lower than that, you fall out the sky. And that's the flag. They bring your ammunition was dipped in powder paint, so you'd have blue, red, purple, yellow, whatever. The four fighters on the one flag. So when you came back, there'd be a few holes in it, and they'd score you on whatever colour your ammunition you were firing. And there's Dave Liggett, the flight commander, giving the score. Pete Stone, again, no, most of those are died. Oh, he's dead. But Pete Stone, sadly killed in a Harrier, is taking the score. And Dave Liggett, there, if he was flying purple, he'd say, "That's a purple." We said, "No, it's not, it's blue." It's purple, you know. Another one of the Lightning. So lived in Germany for 4 years, where there's no speed limit on the Autobahn. I could do 220 kilometers an hour on the Autobahn and that, and go camping and get down to the south of France quite quickly. Got married in Germany, and there we are, back at work. A Lightning going vertically upwards, and a Lightning going vertically downwards. Not my squadron, but one did go downwards a bit too quickly and made a big hole in the ground at Goodisloe. Had a hydraulic failure. So that's what a Lightning looks like. Oh, the pilots got out. It was a 2-seater. And that's the buildings in the distance of the married patch. They've just missed our own married quarters. And there's a picture of the Wehrmacht in World War II marching in the gates of RAF Gütersloh, and that building in the background is the sergeant's mess. And that picture, that photo hung on the wall of the sergeant's mess. And all the sergeants in my squadron asked me, because I was a standard bearer, if we could reenact that picture with them marching out. So we put the cameraman in the same place, and I went and got the squadron standard, and we marched out the gate with them there, so they could put that picture on the wall of their bar. And me with the sword and a couple of escorts who are still mates on Facebook to this day. And that one, the sergeant's stride. There was all the sergeants and chief technicians on 92 Squadron. The Lightning was also sold to Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. That's a Saudi one. And when the Al Yamama project replaced the Lightning with the Tornado, part of the agreement was with the US and Israel and everything was that those aeroplanes had to be flown back to England. They couldn't have them and the Tornado at the same time. And it's one of them that ended up in South Africa in private hands. And that's the last one I flew, which is now in a museum in Scotland. I delivered it from Gütersloh to East Fortune, to Lucas, but then it was carried by helicopter, and a US Marine Corps helicopter, Jolly Green Giant, gave it a free lift from Lucas across the Firth of Forth to East Fortune. And that's the control column in my house in Thailand, where I've been living for the last 30 years. That's if I stand there, you won't be able to hear me, but the lever is the brake. It was handbrake, and you delivered the pressure to the wheels by your rudder pedals, but the brake was by hand, and you see the trigger at the front there for missiles and guns, and the springy thing at the back is the aileron trim, the tailplane trim. The other switch is flight director and autopilot, camera, bombs, and the switch halfway up the control column is the radio transmit switch. And that's my aeroplane, Delta, with the wingtips chopped off at a field somewhere in Germany. Then I got posted to Cranwell to become an instructor against my wishes, and ended up instructing back at Valley in Isle of Anglesey in North Wales, instructing on the Hawk. I protested about being posted as an instructor, but it was fantastic. 4 years. A wonderful aeroplane to fly, and all our training the students was high level up to Scotland, low level all around Scotland, and high level back to Anglesey, or low level flying all around Wales. The whole of Wales was those days was a low flying area. The airplane was stressed -3 to +9. So at the end of every general handling sortie, you gave the student 5 minutes of aerobatics, and he'd bunt his brains and you'd sit in the back there being crushed under the G-force. And at the end of 4 years of there, my oxygen mask had worn so heavily on my nose that the skin on the bridge of my nose had become transparent, and there was no fat there. You could see the bone through a bit of skin, transparent skin. It came back after a couple of years. That's RAF Valley, retracting the undercarriage on a go-round. And as I said, I kept shuttling to and from East Africa in the Charlie 130 Hercules, once in a VC-10 actually. Via Seychelles, we were taking the Sandhurst Band to Seychelles. We were going to play the following week when Princess Margaret was going to be there for the 200th anniversary or something. But usually I got a free lift and a Herc. And this picture's there because I managed to get a 2-week detachment to 47 Squadron at Lynham, and we went out to Belize, supplying the Gurkhas. Belize was coming up to independence, so it's about 4 years before they got independence, but Guatemala was saber rattling and wanting to grab them. They claimed that Belize was theirs, so we had a flight of about 5 or 6 Harriers out there, and the Gurkha regiment on the border of Guatemala, and we had to go and dump supplies to them. Another royal British disaster. If you want to hear about that in the questions, I'll tell you about this episode in the far-flung outpost of the British Empire, or rather my part in its downfall. What a cock-up that was. There we are, back at Valley, the Hawk, lovely aeroplane. Then I had the option to retire from the RAF after 12 years, and I said, well, what will happen if I stay? And they said, well, you'll go back to Lightnings. And I'd done 4 years on the Lightnings. We need you as an instructor on Lightnings at Binbrook in Lincolnshire. Terrible part of the world, and the airplane was getting pretty old by then and very tired, very restricted fatigue life, so I didn't want to go back there, and so I left, took the option to leave, and I got a job with Ferranti on the push-pull Cessna 337. The picture of the DC-10 in the background, this is taken at Charles de Gaulle Airport. Most of the flights were to Ipswich or Scotland or all over England, Ministry of Defence work. But the DC-10 is relevant if you want to ask me questions later about the real reason why the Concorde crashed when it took off from Paris. And it wasn't due to Continental Airlines DC-10. My daughter, another story that goes with that about Ministry of Defence work, picking up something rather suspicious from Ministry of Defence in London and taking it along the route of the royal wedding just 1 week before Prince Charles married Lady Diana Spencer. If they'd caught me there, I'd have been in trouble. The boss wanted to sell that aeroplane, the Cessna 337, and replace it with a helicopter. So he asked me if I would do the helicopter CPL. He had a PPL himself on fixed wing and helicopters, and he wanted me to do a helicopter CPL. But I was more interested in getting into an airline, and so I declined that. And as I wasn't jet current, airlines wanted me to be, I had an interview for a job, but they wanted me to be jet current. So I went out and joined the Singapore Air Force. The Singapore Air Force had been formed at RAF Chivenor in Devon 13 years beforehand on Hunters. That's where their Air Force was formed, and that is where it was based. I believe it's based up the road here now. But by this time, those little Chinese pilots in Devon, in their Air Force, were all leaders of their Air Force, and they offered me a job as an instructor on the Strike Master. So I went out there with the family. It was wonderful. Had a lovely time there. The course was weapons training, air-to-air, ranging and tracking, city weave, air-to-air gun firing, and air-to-ground bombs on a range just to the south of Singapore. But once every 3 months we'd have a air defence exercise, and we'd get airborne. Strike Masters would be the aggressors, and the 5-power agreement, which was Malaysia, Singapore, UK, New Zealand and you guys, 5-power agreement, and our job was to defend Singapore against invasion. And as I say, we were the enemy, we were the aggressors, so we would get airborne high level up to Kuantan in the north of Malay Peninsula, drop down to low level and zigzag our way down to attack a target in Singapore, usually on Tengah airfield, but it could be a shopping mall or a HDB housing block, and we'd actually do air to ground and have to take the picture with bombs and guns loaded. Crazy. But it's very interesting because the capping at low level to try and intercept us, done by the Malaysians and the F5s, the Singapore F5s, and your Air Force, Royal Australian Air Force, and the Mirage. And they were capping, and we would try to get through their caps, or if they intercepted us, we'd turn tightly and give them a hard job tracking us, which was exactly the opposite of the job I'd done in Germany. So it's quite fun to be on the other side. I hadn't got a picture of myself in our Royal Singapore Air Force uniform, so that's the mess kit. And then next job was Saudi Arabia, flying the same aeroplane, the Strike Master, but more basic flying training. Well, advanced flying training, but not the weapons phase, just teaching them to fly, instrument flying, formation flying, navigation. When the course graduated, all the instructors would get airborne and do a fly pass for their graduation parade. And the formation we flew would spell out the course number in Arabic. Flying low level around Saudi Arabia is very, very interesting. And after 2 years, I left that job, went back to the UK, got a job with Airfoil, who just got the contract to fly the BAE 146 for TNT. I got on that as a co-pilot, and very lucky to get that job. But once I got a 4-engine jet on my license, everything opened up and every airline offered me a job. I only did the job for about 9 months, 10 months, and night freighting from Birmingham to Nuremberg, Hanover, Birmingham, and then next day Aldergrove in Northern Ireland, Prestwick, where we day stop, night stop and day stop. On the golf course at Troon, we got permission to use their golf course. It was really good. And then night freighting back around Europe. And then when we got the second aeroplane, we go Gothenburg in Stockholm, back to Gothenburg in Sweden, and back to Birmingham. And as I say, everyone offered me a job, so I joined British Caledonian Airways, which was a merger of BUA, which we talked about earlier, and Caledonian Airways. On the BAC 111, and no sooner had I joined them that they announced they were merging with British Airways. Scandinavian Airlines System, SAS, had offered to buy British Caledonian for £350 million, but British Airways weren't having any of that, so they upped their offer. Just after I joined British Caledonian, I found out it was going to be in British Airways, which wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, but it meant British Airways got all the BCAL routes from that company, but we're only allowed to keep the routes to South America and Saudi Arabia and places, and West Africa, Banjul and places. But they had to give up all the short-haul routes out of Gatwick, give them to Dan Air and Air UK. So they got rid of the 111 and posted me to the Tristar. So I did about a year on the 111, went to the Tristar at Heathrow as a co-pilot. A wonderful aeroplane, my favourite aeroplane, way ahead of its time in my opinion. Anyone here fly the Tristar? Most favoured by many people, especially those who flew in Cathay. Fantastic flight control system, and that was really interesting job because it took us all over the world, India, Middle East, Kuwait, everywhere. But I'd only been on it about 9 months when we got this beast, the 747-400. It's the wrong colour scheme. It wasn't that colour scheme. It was still in that colour scheme. But that's the picture I found. And we were the launch customer on that. So told me I got to do the course. I was on the first course on the 400. Went out to Sydney to do my training. I did one trip to, in those days the simulator wasn't zero flight time rated, so we had to fly the aeroplane itself to do the training from base training from an RAF station called Bryce Norton, and some in Shannon in Ireland, and a very short sector from one ADF beacon to another, ILS, land, taxi round, take off. They call that one sector. And then I did one sector to Paris and back, and then positioned out to Sydney for the first 747-400 to land in Sydney, and that was the view from my hotel room. And I did my next few sectors to Melbourne and back, Brisbane and back, and then positioned here on Australian Airlines, and my last training sector was from here to Singapore. And then I was finished training, licensed to kill, and I think that was the best landing I ever did in the next 6 years, was that one in Singapore. But it wasn't long before we were posted back to Australia. I did about a year in Sydney, and my kids went to school there, and from Sydney we'd do those trips to Brisbane back, Melbourne and back, Adelaide, and positioning here on Australian Airlines and flying to Auckland and then Auckland back in, and probably once a week from Sydney up to Bangkok. Which is how I got to know Thailand, where I've been living for the last 30 years. And then put the moke in the hold at the end of that posting, and arrived back in UK, where I had a farm on the Isle of Anglesey. 3 kids to learn to fly that, learnt to drive in the moke. And after about 30 years, it came back to Australia, where it's now on a vineyard in Victoria, where they do weddings and they bring the bride to the wedding and that. So I'm told. Anyway, after 3.5 years on the 400, I could get command in British Airways by going to Birmingham and going back down to short haul again on the 737. It was a quick way to become a captain, and there it is. 737-200. I only had to do about 2.5 years on it. It wasn't my favourite airplane, but I flew as pilot in command on 40 different airplane types as a military and civilian, and I was an instructor on light aircraft and a CAA examiner, and I used to do lots of flying in people's own aeroplanes, doing twin engine ratings or night ratings or IMC ratings. So I flew 40 different types, and that is not in the first 39 of my favourite airplanes. I had an engine failure on takeoff, so perhaps I'm a bit biased. Pratt & Whitney 88D, 88D, yeah, blew up on takeoff from Glasgow. Put about 4,000 pieces of metal on the runway. Closed Glasgow for the night. They picked up all the pieces, put them in the back of a Land Rover, and I still got 2 pieces of the turbine blades. Funnily enough, when it was snowing, it was about -1. There was a 10-knot wind from the west, crosswind. It was horrible, and so I didn't do an emergency evacuation. I got bollocked for that later, but the CAA were very pleased that no one got injured. When the fire crew came out to the runway and plugged in and spoke to me, I said, "Is there any fire?" They said, "No." Thank God for that. We'll keep the passengers on the plane then. They said there's a bit of damage to the fuselage, the aft fuselage, where it comes up like that. They said the bits of metal sticking out of the fuselage. If those of you who know about aerodynamics might know that they put little vortex generators, little triangular bits of metal to generate a vortex, so to reduce the drag, and that's what they were talking about. But the damage was not contained. I mean, it had blown the cowling off, and actually we found later it damaged the leading edge of the port tailplane, which I saw later when I flew it, next flew it. After only 2.5 years from that, I managed to get back onto the 747-400 for another nearly 4 years, flying everywhere. South America, Japan a lot, Hong Kong a lot, China, all over North America with the longer routes, Mexico, lots of places in South America. Wonderful route structure we had on that, great fun. And finally transferred to the Boeing 777-200, which was a wonderful airplane, and also interesting because you went to a lot of the intermediate places that didn't go to on the jumbo. That one took me back to Dar es Salaam a couple of times. We used to go via Entebbe, stay a couple of nights in Entebbe, then bring up the next aeroplane and take it from Entebbe to Dar es Salaam, which was my home when I was a kid. So of course I always managed to find a thunderstorm en route between Entebbe and Dar es Salaam and divert about 150 miles port of track, so I could do a quick orbit of Mount Kilimanjaro and take pictures of that. And I always told my passengers I climbed that mountain. I did that twice. I never got into trouble. There we are, last flight. We got to choose our retirement flight, and I chose Antigua. because by this time I had a classic yacht, and I wanted to go there for the classic week after Antigua race week. They did classic week in April 2005. My dining out night in Antigua, cabin crew put on a meal for me, and when we came to leave at night time, the fire section made one of those arches of water as a salute, say goodbye. The fire trucks pitched up at the aeroplane. Haven't got any pictures of the arc from the outside, but that's what it looks like from the cockpit when they're spraying arch of water over you, which I was very touched, because the island are suffering from a severe water shortage at the time, and that's what it looks like inside the aeroplane. Quite an emotional moment. Last trip, and back to London, where they gave me something, I can't remember what, and we came down the steps. Everyone in the crew except the first officer, because he took the picture, so a great guy. And that was the end of my flying career. I've flown a few times since, a couple of times with Michael, and the flying club from south of Thailand come up to Chiang Rai, where I live, in 5 different aeroplanes, stay with me for a few days, and then I get to fly each different aeroplane from Chiang Rai to Chiang Mai to Pai, Mae Hong Son, and back to Chiang Rai. So I get to fly. I don't log those flights, but I did one more trip in the Tiger Moth. 45 years after I took this guy up for a flight in the my Tiger Moth, he now owns it. And I went for a trip with him in White Waltham about 8 years ago. So, like Cincinnatus, I retired to my plough, and I bought this yacht, Sirius, the first Australian yacht to sail around the world. She sailed around the world in 1935, and there she is leaving Sydney Harbour. You see the heads on the left, and I bought that 4 years before I retired, and spent a lot of time renovating it and getting it seaworthy. It was in Langkawi, and so I decided to spend my remaining years sailing that. I got it all geared up with radar and chart plotter and autopilot and AIS, all the things a jumbo pilot needs when he's sailing a classic sailing yacht, and decided not to fly anymore. I'd had offers from a couple of companies, Singapore Airlines, which a funny story, I'll tell you about that if you want to know, and Emirates, because a mate of mine was by that time the ops director of Emirates, and they offered me a job, but I said no. I'd been diagnosed with cancer only 9 or 10 months before I retired, pancreatic cancer, and told I'd got 1 month to live. It was a bit of an eye-opener. Of course, being a pilot, I argued with the specialist and told him he was wrong, but I was quite healthy, no pain, no symptoms at all. And to cut a long story short, he gave me 2 months to live, not 1 month, and he referred me to an oncologist who said, I think you're beyond clinical trials, probably the only thing left for you is palliative care. It was pretty near the end, and but she referred me to a very good surgeon, Jeremy Thompson, who had gave me a modified Whipple's procedure, one of his own modifications of a Whipple's procedure, and that was 2004. So over 20 years later, I'm still going. That's a cartoon. I don't know why I downloaded that. My daughter sent me. There might be one or two. One of the last airplanes I flew, except for Michael's Cessna 172, was this aeroplane. It's quite interesting. Have I got any time to talk about that, Stephen? Yes. Yeah? The Virus, a plastic aeroplane, and owned by a Norwegian ship's captain called Fritz. And his girlfriend got in another aeroplane, and I flew that with him from Pai to Mae Hong Son. But we knew we couldn't get any fuel in Mae Hong Son, and it took motor fuel. And Mae Hong Son would only have jet fuel or, avgas and avtur. So he said, I need to get the jerry cans to the petrol station to buy some petrol. And there we are, tipping the petrol into the top of the wing. And he had a a motor scooter. So he said he'd take me out to the airport and leave me there, 14-kilometre drive to the servo to get the petrol, come back with 2 jerry cans on the motorbike. I said, a mate of mine called Pat, 25 years earlier, and I had walked from Pai to Mae Hong Son through the forest. It's nothing but forest and mountains. It took 4 days, 3 nights sleeping in the jungle and 4-night walk. I said, I've just met up with him again. He's got a ute and I'm sure he's got some jerry cans. We can do it in one trip. And he said, no, I'll take you out of the airport. I'll do it my way. We'll do it my way. Took 2 jerry cans, came back, we poured the petrol into the wing. And he went off again to get 2 more. We waited for ages and he came back and we poured that petrol into the wing. Now this aeroplane has a handle between the seats and you pull that and it fires an explosive bolt which deploys a parachute and the airplane would come down nicely and land on its wheels like that. Well, he didn't want to go back and get the 3rd load of fuel. He said, I've got enough. And I flew it to Mae Hong Son. We stayed there a couple of nights and the last flight this airplane did was to go home. He didn't take me back to Chiang Rai. I went in a Cessna 180, but he put his girlfriend in that and they flew direct back to Easton in southeast Thailand near Jomtien, and of course ran out of fuel 2 miles short of the runway. Put it down in a paddy field which ripped the undercarriage off, and being plastic, the engine ripped itself out of the mounting and kept going forwards. That was it. He took the wing off. The silly thing is he could have maintained his height, and then if the engine failed he'd either be over the airfield and do a forced landing or pull the handle and do a parachute let down. I think that was probably the last slide. Oh, just a plug for my yacht. I sold it a year ago and there she is in a shipyard in Phuket. And if you want to read about the history of the guys who sailed it around the world, I met the 2 sons of the original owner. They're both dead now, but I met them when they were in their 90s. That's when I was in Sydney, just after I retired, about when I retired. One of them, Harold, died aged 97, but Dick, the one who navigated around the world before World War II, 1935 1937, he joined the Royal Navy during the war, and he was a navigator on these convoys, went to Murmansk up through the Baltic where they were constantly under attack, and he got the DSO for that. Later he was mayor of Parramatta about 3 times. He'd got chest full of medals, but he'd never got anything for navigating Sirius around the world. And so one of his sons, Tim, who's I've just been staying with in Tasmania, nominated him for the Order of Australia, and they asked me to second the thing, which I did back in 2010. And we nominated him, and the Secretariat in Canberra replied to me and they said, thank you very much for your submission, we'll consider this. And I was in New Zealand at the time. I said, well, he will be 100 in June. And they said, oh, well, we'll rush it through then. And fair enough, he got the Order of Australia on the Queen's Birthday Honours List that June, the same month that he was 100 years old. And he went on to be 102. But that's my website, www.sirius9035.com, and you can read a lot of things about their journey around the world. And the new owner, who's a boat builder on the Gold Coast, has just opened a GoFundMe campaign, and that's the link to that if you wanted to raise $2,330 already. If you want to chip in $20 or $50, please go to that website and give him some money to pay for the next restoration. End of slideshow. Click to exit.